the road opposite the street. Then toilets and everything out there to the left, if you need those. Food and wine will be serving at 7:45 after you've heard the speak. If you do get tea and coffee, first of all, please grab the opportunity very quickly. We will be circulating feedback forms after the event, so if you could actually complete that, please, and return it. That's really helpful for us in understanding on your needs as a membership and the sort of topics that you want to hear about. Out of interest, how many people here are members of the LinkedIn group? Okay. And for those of you who aren't, whether it's because you haven't heard of it or because you're just perhaps not particularly interested in it, we'd really like to get more people on there and start having a conversation around some of the things that we hear at these events. We'll share the sort of lessons learned and the key points from these sessions there, and it'd be great to get a bit more conversation going there. And then finally, I would like to introduce Serena Andrews, who's very, very kindly come to speak to us tonight about information assurance in the health sector. Long distinguished history from everything from Ministry of Defence, SOCA, wide range of non-executive director roles, and I believe you also have quite a keen interest in smart cities and security as well. But as I say tonight, it's going to be in capacity as chair of the, let me get this right, Information Assurance and Cybersecurity Committee for Nhs Digital. So, thank you.
Mikala, thank you very much, and ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I've known Mikala for 2 or 3 years now, I think. And those of you who read the annual report of the Health and Social Care Information Centre, now Nhs Digital, for last year, she graced part of that report, giving a comment on the importance of data to healthcare. First of all, I should make clear that I am neither a health professional, nor an IT professional, nor a security professional. I do governance. And so if anyone wants to leave now, please feel free to do so. I thought I'd begin by just telling you a little bit about Nhs Digital and the challenges that we face in supporting the getting on for more than 3 million people engaged in health and social care in England alone, to ensure that they are able to deliver the best possible health and care to patients and to users, and to do so as effectively, as safely and securely as possible, and in due course to enable all of those patients and users to take control of their own treatment. Nhs Digital is formally, statutorily, the Health and Social Care Information Centre. It was created by the Health and Social Care Act of 2012 and came into effect in April 2013. And we rebranded last summer as Nhs Digital. But in law, we are the Health and Social Care Information Centre. It's an executive, non-departmental public body of the Department of Health, one of 11 arm's length bodies. We've got about getting on for slightly shy of 3,000 staff around the country, centred in Leeds, but also in a number of other places in England. It's the statutory duty of the Health and Social Care Information Centre to collect, analyse and publish data to ensure effective information governance, to improve data quality, and to reduce the administrative burden on health and social care providers. And that's a really, really important thing that I want you to bear in mind. We are a safe haven for the collection, holding and synthesizing and managing the release of patient confidential data. And we operate the national networks, Spine and N3, which hold the whole thing together. And we operate services such as NHS 111 and various national screening programs. Again, this afternoon, I was at a NHS 111 call centre near Ladbroke Grove, looking at what they're actually doing on the ground in that space. We also provide advice and support, including from the Digital Data Security Centre. Now this centre in Leeds hosts what we call CareCert, which offers 24/7 intelligence, knowledge, assurance and support to incident management across the whole health and care system. The Data Security Centre is at the forefront of information and data security and provides the gateway to the National Cyber Security Centre. In fact, it's one of only 2 certs that have not been absorbed within the National Cyber Security Centre. And it should be the place to which the wider health and care system comes for advice and guidance and support. But we are not a regulator, and no one is obliged to accept our advice and support. It's sometimes reminiscent of those of you who are old enough to remember Eric Cantona. It's a bit like watching a football game from the stands and yelling advice to the players who ignore you or by their gestures indicate what they think of your advice. One of them scores an own goal and they come over, do a flying kick and say, "Why did you let me do that?" So I think we have a really positive message to put across. It's sometimes not appreciated as much as it should be, nor, in my view, do we make, or do people make the maximum use of the data and the capabilities that we have. The scale of the challenge we face is huge. On the NHS Mail and Spine, there are probably about 500,000 concurrent users at any one time. They generate, in a typical week, something around 4 billion transactions across the system. And for those of you not good at mental arithmetic, that's an average of 3,000 a second. And clearly there are a significantly larger number in peak hours than there are in silent hours. One of the things that we... Right, that's going to be... It doesn't seem to be working. Never mind.
While it's being sorted out, can I be very dull and ask whether you're happy to take questions as you go through it, or whether you want to...
Well, I think probably it would be a good idea if I just sort of paint the picture, and then we can pick up questions afterwards. I think it's probably a sensible way to do it, if you don't mind. There we are. The nature of the challenge. So you've got these 4 billion transactions going on in a typical week, 3 to 4 security incidents, 0.3% of traffic on the M3 network is malicious. Now that sounds like a very small amount. Actually, a very small percentage of a very large number is still a very large number. It's about 12.5 million pieces of malicious traffic a week. 60% of incoming emails marked as spam and screened out. That works out at about 7 million items of spam coming into the system. Nor are we dealing with a seamless entity. Oops, sorry, what happened there? Yeah. In England alone, and of course there are 4 NHSs in these islands, there are 58 million sets of multiple patient confidential data held in many different places by the tens of thousands of independently governed and accountable primary, secondary and social care providers, most of which are in the private sector. 220 clinical commissioning groups, 8,000 GP practices, 240 foundation and other trusts, and 152 local authorities. And that's north of about 1.5 million users who need more or less access, which frankly patients expect them to have when they interact with them, to that patient data. And there are increasingly demands from academia and private sector researchers for access to that data. And indeed, in the last 12 months, we've seen the volume of requests almost double. At the same time, the system is progressively being opened up to patients, both to read and upload information from their personal devices. And that population of 58 million includes a cross-section of the mischievous, the malicious, hackers, organised criminals, and worse, all of whom have absolute right of access into the system. There are thousands of apps in development to help clinicians and patients to manage care more effectively. And again, a huge challenge of how do we ensure that the quality and the security of those apps meets the standard. What is the quality? Where is the definitive final record of an individual's care? And indeed, we managed through the information assurance and cybersecurity community that Mark McCullough referred to persuade government that in health and social care, it's the patient confidential data, not the wires and the pipes, that are the CMI, critical national infrastructure. Nhs Digital maintains 15 separate messaging services, more than 80 professional patient services, including NHS Choices and 111, 60 data and secondary user services, which keep the whole system running together. Summary care records are now include 98% of the population of England and are accessed by a clinician every 7 seconds. An electronic prescribing service now serves 99% of 12,000 community pharmacies and handles 1.3 million items a day, representing a saving of about 240 million to the NHS. But it's more than that, because information and its effective exploitation are critical to the delivery of better and safer care to patients. But the willingness of individual patients and users not to opt out of their data being shared depends on them trusting that it will be properly used and safeguarded. And the reporting of WannaCry in May, frankly, was not helpful. But let it be recorded that it did not cripple the NHS, nor did it bring it to its knees, which I've seen banded around in the media. And who says so? Well, the National Audit Office published a report at the end of October, and that articulated that there are about 200,000 computers around the world which were affected in over 100 countries. 81 out of 236 trusts were affected, of which only 37 were actually infected. The others panicked and cut themselves off from the system and then found they couldn't deal with their patients. 595 of 8,000 GP practices, 7,000 appointments were cancelled, no patient data was compromised, no loss of life was identified and no ransom was paid. But there were lots of lessons that were identified. And also, to be frank, we were lucky. Friday in May is probably the ideal time to target the NHS if you don't want to, or not to target, it wasn't targeted, if you want to have minimum impact. No winter pressures. Primary care was largely offline over the weekend. Somebody inadvertently tripped over the kill switch within 12 hours of the thing starting. CareCert resources were just about sufficient. CareCert had issued specific alerts and instructions to patch, advice to patch, and those who had acted on those alerts and completed the patching properly were largely unaffected, unless of course they disconnected themselves from the system. And the key decision was taken by NHS England about 4 hours in to declare a major incident and invoke the emergency preparedness, resilience and response arrangements. We were reduced at one point to texting to communicate with those trusts who disconnected themselves from the system. The National Data Guardian and the Dame Fiona Caldecott and the Care Quality Commission had been commissioned by Jeremy Hunt in 2015 to develop new security standards and methods of testing compliance. The following, as it was commissioned in 2015, it was actually published in July 2016. There was a period of consultation which completed at the end of 2016. WannaCry happened in May 2017, and the government response was published in September 2017. Now, you might think that perhaps if that government response had been published a little earlier, WannaCry might even have less impact than in fact it did. But on the issue of security, there was really nothing terribly sophisticated. Effectively, it amounted to the adoption of the 10 national security standards, which were recommended by Jane Fiona, as essentially cyber essentials for health and social care. The standards focus on technology, on process, and on people, but above all, on leadership. And that leadership needs to be committed and visible. It is as much a board issue as clinical and financial compliance. It is a key issue for non-executives, which I'll come back to in a moment. There is a new data security and protection toolkit, which replaces the information governance toolkit, which frankly was past its sell-by date. And that toolkit will be part of the CQC well-led inspection process from this month, and we've got mandatory for everyone they inspect from April next year. But it's about leadership, leadership, and leadership. We need to embed these processes in the DNA of business as usual as much as infection control, because it is actually the control of an infection. But how do we influence behavior across the tens of thousands of providers who make up the system? And particularly in social care, where only 0.6 of 1% of care homes are actually on NHS mail. And before you leap to any judgments though, despite all the functionality that's available, the NHS is probably the only organisation in the UK that still makes substantial use of fax. Now, although the government response was published 4 months after the WannaCry attack, the National Data Guardian and the Care Quality Commission had advised trusts to take action in July 2016 on the basis of the publication of their initial report. And the requirement to embrace these standards has been included in GP contracts from the 1st of April this year. I think in the expectation that the government response would be published in that timescale, but they were in the contracts. Now, I don't need to tell you that there's no such thing as absolute cyber security. What this is about is managing information insecurity. And that, of course, is what information assurance, I don't need to tell you that, is all about. Cybersecurity or information assurance. It is much, much more than just cyber security. Information assurance is about how all aspects of the way in which an organisation handles the data for which it is responsible, just one dimension of which is what we call cybersecurity. It's much more than that. It's about process, it's about culture, it's about people, and it's a core business risk for any organisation. We need to recognise that attacks will succeed and data may be lost. And the focus needs to be not just on the security, but on resilience and on recovery. And to that end, on Friday of last week, the Department of Health held its first tabletop exercise on crisis management around a cyber incident. And that involved all the players, NHS England, Nhs Digital, NHS Improvement, trusts, National Cyber Security Centre, and incorporated lessons identified from the WannaCry incident. Now, I think probably the private sector is not being as helpful as it could be. There is a sort of feeding frenzy of companies driven by commercial ambitions. And I think there's a real risk of multiple alternative solutions being promoted to trusts and CCG, rather than helping them to understand how they can best embrace those standards laid down by Dame Fiona Caldecott, adopted by the department, and now being broadcast across the system. Those are the things that we're interested in, not 7 principles or 6 this or 5 that, or this is the way we do it with our brand. Much of the functionality is already available. It's available free. There's a library of approved apps available on the system, and 111 pathways are continuously under review. My own personal experience of my father, who's 96 in a care home in the Midlands, was indicative, I think, of just how the system is not making available what's there. A foundation trust where everything is recorded in manuscript. A discharged nurse who had to interpret the various scribbles, put it into a typed piece of paper, which they then post to the GP second class. The GP then has to employ someone else, injecting additional risk, to put that onto their system. Functionality is there for the data to be captured in digital form, for the discharged nurse to send it instantly to the GP, and the GP to translate it into their system. But that's not the way we do it here. We've always done it this way. We'll send it second class next week. But we could fax it if you like. I despair. When he went to a care home, his medications and discharge notes followed 4 hours later, believe it or not, in a taxi. So there's a lot to do. There was a report last year by the Corsham Institute and RAND, which studied the delivery of health in a digital environment. It was interesting that no one from NHS England or Nhs Digital contributed to the study, but it identified 3 increasingly conservative blockers. The first were patients, who instinctively don't trust anyone with their data, unless, of course, they're ill, in which case they want to know why you haven't shared it with everybody before. The next, even more conservative, are the policymakers and the regulators, who are paranoid about getting something wrong and having to account for it. And then arguably the most conservative and the most resistant are senior clinicians, who are unwilling to see the opportunities for transformation of care, rather than the ability to do what they've always done, rather more easily and effectively. But a balance does have to be struck between security and the delivery of effective patient care. There is also, of course, the added dimension of Gdpr, which comes into effect on the 25th of May next year. That's 112 working days from today. And that will massively increase the financial consequences of data loss, particularly for large providers. It doesn't actually require users or data controllers to do significantly more than they should be doing already under existing data protection law, except perhaps the appointment of an accountable data protection officer, mandatory reporting, and the right to be forgotten. But it's no fundamental change the responsible governance and ownership of data. But of course that's also complicated by the Data Protection Bill, which is working its way through Parliament at the moment and will enshrine it in UK law, and the 2016 Network and Information Systems Directive, which comes into force on the same day. So what does all this mean for information assurance professionals? Well, today, potentially, we have access to huge volumes of data, covering cradle-to-grave coded material in general practice, national episode statistics from all aspects of secondary care, from acute admissions to outpatients and everything in between, mental health and learning disabilities, national disease registries, and much, much more besides. And coming fast down the track, data on genomics, which will expand the volume and sensitivity of data exponentially. We are at the forefront of a digital technical revolution, which has the power to unlock this data for the benefit of society by improving decision support through algorithms and artificial intelligence, linking pathways of care to gain new insights through big data analytical techniques and to inform better commissioning, linking genomic and other data, providing greater insights into prediction, into treatment, and potentially prevention. And the ability to generate more focused research hypotheses and support research trials using routine data through a variety of data science approaches. There are huge opportunities to deliver better, safer, more effective care to patients. And yet a very recent independent survey of 100 NHS IT decision makers across acute, primary and secondary care found that only 30% cited benefits in terms of improved effectiveness of treatment. More than half focused on streamlined processes and long-term cost savings. Although it was in August, so memories of WannaCry should have been relatively fresh, almost 80% saw that they'd been directly affected by WannaCry. And 40% said their department had barely been able to function, if at all. I gave you the NAO report. Really interesting what the reporting, misreporting, and the scale of the problem created. But there was a good side of that, because clinicians across the system have understood that this potentially will impact on the care they're able to provide their patients. And that is a huge step forward. In the same survey, only 1 in 3 respondents said they were using the various care cert offerings, although another third were planning to use them in future. Well, they probably haven't taken advantage of them, I suspect. There is a ministerial ambition for public debate over the next few months, along the lines of why people should not opt out because their data is safe. Well, wrong. The data is as safe as we can make it. And information assurance professionals have a vital part to play, it seems to me, in informing that debate. They need to understand the new technologies and their potential and help to unlock that data for public benefit while protecting it appropriately and maintaining public trust. They need to help boards and senior leaders to understand the new data protection obligations and help them to conform to them while communicating what they're doing to the owners of the data and assuring all of them that they have nothing to fear. And all this, keeping the message as simple as possible but no simpler, needs information assurance professionals to work with their colleagues in communications to ensure that messages about transparency are aimed at the citizen in a language they understand and through channels to which they all have access. It needs to meet the needs of those at the edge of society as well as the mainstream and those who are digital phobes as well as digital nerds. I've already mentioned the role of non-executive directors and the part that they have to play, whether in the public or private sector, in focusing the attention of executive management on what should be a strategic business issue, just as much as clinical safety or financial propriety. We need a culture in which basic cyber hygiene, as I said, becomes as much second nature to those providing patient care as infection control, because this is an infection with the potential to cause many deaths, whether directly or indirectly, if it takes hold. And these are the sorts of things that I think non-executives need to know. And some of the questions they need to ask. This is what information assurance is about and how it differs from just cybersecurity. And executives also need to be able to give convincing answers to those questions, because from the 1st of April next year, the Care Quality Commission inspections across health and care will focus on these areas and around the new data security and protection toolkit. So there are some huge challenges, but also some huge opportunities, as long as we don't allow those challenges to get in the way. But what never ceases to surprise me is the level of ignorance amongst many leaders in health and care about the nature of the data and of the risks which can and must be managed if we're to realise the potential to transform the way in which care is delivered. And if we're to allow the NHS to rise to the challenge of an ageing population, ever more costly procedures and treatments, and public expectations in an increasingly constrained resource environment. But if people really embrace the functional improvements and efficiencies that are made possible by the intelligent use of data, you can achieve so much more with the resources that are there today. NHSD's mission is to enable information and technology to deliver better health and care for patients and for users, and better tools for clinicians. These are some of the sound bites taken from the National Cyber Security Strategy. It's not the sophistication of the attacker, but the vulnerability of the victim that is the deciding factor. We just got basic housekeeping right across trusts and CCGs. 80% of these problems will be managed away. And I'll leave the last word to Bob Wachter, who's the US author of Digital Doctor. He said in a report for the Health Secretary last year, to those who wonder whether the NHS can afford an ambitious effort to digitise in today's environment, the answer is clear. The one thing the NHS cannot afford to do is to remain a largely non-digital system. It's time to get on with IT. But information assurance professionals have a huge role to play in making sure those opportunities can be embraced in a way which is secure and safe and enables the benefits to be delivered. Thank you. Questions? Yes.
Right. Much as me, thank you for the talk. Excellent. Very interesting. Thank you. I read a lot of American healthcare notices. There are lots of people putting things out in America. one of the things that is pushed is genomes, or mapping people's genomes, and comparing that with health records of other people in order to use mass data to analyse cause and effect. But much of the healthcare given is management, not cure. And in managing we spend money which is not well spent. In curing we spend money well. So how can we use our data we are collecting in order to improve delivery?
Well, we get an even better return if we invest in prevention. And I think that what the data enables us to do is understand what those lifestyle patterns are which precipitate illness, disease, and so on. So there's a lot of work going into understanding prevention, and you see it on a day-to-day basis. The messages coming out about lifestyle, smoking, obesity, all of that, which can massively reduce and contain and avoid altogether the need to manage or cure.
Yes.
The issue of the US approach is probably even more disjointed than it is across the NHS. They have a very different approach to electronic health records. Their electronic health records attract a premium in the dark market because they have financial information embedded as well. There is an organisation called Genomics England, which is running a 100,000 genome project, where they are mapping the genomes, that's true, in the name 100,000 people, but they are selected from a population of individuals who have in their families inherited diseases. And they are really working to try to understand where the indicators are for those diseases so that in future they can be switched off if we make it less intervention again. So now the downside, people like Med Confidential will tell you, is that if we multiply that out across 58 million people, so not 100,000, but 58 million, the scale of the data involved is massive. And it is, I've heard it suggested, that there will be real risks of that being given to insurance companies to work out premiums and so on and so forth. Albeit, no doubt, using patient confidential data, which that is, for any purpose other than direct care, is illegal. Now, that doesn't stop people doing it because people break the law. Organised criminals actually go out and break the law because that's what they do. But from what I've seen of the protocols that are in place across the UK, or England anyway, because you can do stuff in Scotland that's illegal in England, but never mind. There are sufficient constraints, and the professionalism of the people involved is such that that is a very small risk for what is potentially hugely value-adding in terms of understanding patterns of disease. And as I say, prevention is always better than management or curing. Yeah. Is that?
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Is this on?
It's on.
Sorry, Ian, thank you very much for a very interesting, but I think a somewhat depressing presentation on the state of information assurance in the NHS at the moment. We know it's always going to be jammed tomorrow, but I want to know really about now. You mentioned quite rightly that information security is far wider than IT security. Now, if you go and ask the Chief Information Officer how much he spends on IT security, he will tell you. And we know for the health industry in general, is between 4 and 9% of the IT budget is spent on security. We don't know how much is spent by other departments on security, and yet, as you quite rightly pointed out, that's where the wider issue actually lies. So I'm really trying to get a grip on where your role in digital, which tends to imply the IT part of it, relates to the wider security issues faced by the NHS when it comes to patient data.
Okay. In the early days of Health and Social Care Information Centre, we did a security review of where the risks were. And it came up with a number that are predictable, but actually the big one that was flashing so red it was black was the damage to our reputation of someone else out there doing something stupid. That was when we decided to form, and I think I'm right in saying that there's only one other, may not even be another, organisation that has an Information Assurance and Cyber Security Committee, is Nhs Digital. And it's information assurance, that's what's up front, and cyber security. So, what we are trying to do is to promote a culture across the system in which those, that information assurance, as I said, it's as second nature in clinicians and those people who operate the system as infection control is today. Now that is free. That doesn't require anything, a bit on behavioural change, but it doesn't require any investment to be made. It's about boards taking a lead. It's about chief executives getting up there and saying, this is what we do. It's preventing people, and I'm sure this is apocryphal, but of course it isn't, that if I am a medical professional, because I get very irritated, I mean, you need to have a card with a PIN number to get access to patient confidential data. You see, if you go into some hospitals, I suspect, you'll see one of these pins, cards stuck to the front of the computer with a pin underneath. Now, I don't want you to get a discouraging message from this, but what I'm saying is that there is a huge amount that can be done to improve the security and safety with which data is managed. There's a huge amount that can be done to give clinicians the opportunity to take those benefits. When you get a senior clinician or a GP, and there are lots of them around, who understand why this is important, and they take the leadership of it, that is a really, really powerful driver. And what I'm saying is, there's a huge opportunity here to make use of that data, but in a safe and secure way. There are beacons of excellence across the system. There are also some pretty woeful organisations who are behind the curve. But if we can get everybody up to the standard of the best, then we will be in a much better position. And clinicians understanding that this will enable them to do things better. It's quite interesting, consultants on the subject of artificial intelligence, which is very good at informing diagnostics and decisions on treatment. And artificial intelligence can be millions of bits of data which are put together. And I've seen senior consultants say, oh, don't be ridiculous, are you calling into question my professional competence? You think I can't be as good as this computer? Really? You can think of 1 million, 2 million pieces of information to put together? And that's why I talked about, Rand caution came up with the fact that some of the most resistant people to change are clinicians. If you get people in that position, running with it, championing it, and they are. Keith McNeill, who's about to go back to Australia from NHS England as the CCIO, he's passionate about this sort of thing. But the Nhs Digital Academy, which has been set up to train CIOs and CCIOs to help them to understand the opportunities that are there to be taken. Interestingly, going back to America, the consortium which has set it up is Imperial College in London, Edinburgh University, and a medical school in Boston. And they come together to form this NHS Digital Academy, specifically to train CIOs, CCIOs, clinicians in the opportunities that are here and how to exploit them in a safe and secure way.
May I ask a supplementary?
You may?
You mentioned the role of the Care Quality Commission in reviewing the entity's information, risk management, and assurance. What metrics are they going to use? What metrics are they going to use?
There is the data protection, data security and protection toolkit, which has replaced the IG toolkit. The IG toolkit was a tick box exercise self-assessing people. It was amazing how many people came out with a score of 2 on the basis that if I'm a score of 1, I'll be put into special measures. If I'm 3, well, that's a bit brave, so I go for 2. It was completely non-value adding. The data security and protection toolkit is much more intuitive and it is auditable, and that's the key point. It's not hugely, it's not hugely burdensome. It basically is assessing people against those cyber essentials for health and social care standards that Dame Fiona has written down. But that is the metric that they will use in this space.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Again, like Terry, I very much enjoyed that. Thank you very much. One of the things that was slightly blurred was the differentiation between data and information. We discussed that a lot in the BCS. I mean, data is the raw stuff, information is data in a context. So it's information security that,
There's information assurance.
Information assurance, yes. I mean, data can be, once, you could have all this data.
You have raw data and you put data together and get information.
But you put it into a context and you get information. So the question really is the emphasis on what you're doing about information assurance and less so about data security?
Bear in mind that we're also charged statutorily with improving data quality.
Of course, yes.
And also reducing
different kettle of fish.
Reducing burdens on health and social care providers.
Right.
So, I think well, you say you debated here, angels on pinheads when it comes to when does data become information. But for me, it's that crude raw material that's the data.
Yes.
And as you say, you put it in context, which you then get information. But it's a big challenge, and it's a challenge which gets bigger every day because the quantities of data and the information you can derive from that are increasing exponentially. And when genomics comes in, again there'll be another huge expansion, and that enables you to detect patterns, to pass data sets across one another and so on, and to get indicators. So people cleverer than I am will do research projects and PhDs into where those patterns of so interesting. I'm a geographer. The link between birth deformities and germ measles was discovered by a geographer in Australia. How about that?
So you're saying that what you're really working on is information assurance.
Yeah.
Rather, and data security is obviously an easy business in the grand scheme of things, but it's actually assuring the information.
Yeah. So, yes.
Andrew White of Deloitte. Every country must have this problem, local circumstances, but essentially it's the same thing. Where would you go to find the best examples? And do they do things significantly differently in any way?
Well, every country does it in a slightly different way. And they tend to be cultural. So the US we talked about, very much driven by, I was going to say private sector and so on in terms of, able to sort of develop patents and so on, and there's a lot of money to invest in it. Australia, where in the UK you have a GP. In Australia you have any number of GPs depending on which particular ailment you have. They're developing a system called My Health Record where everybody has their record on one of these. If we were not starting from where we are now, if I was designing it from scratch, I think it's a very good way to do it. And as I said, we're looking to empower patients to take control of their own treatments, and increasingly I think it will migrate towards that. Every patient is entitled now to have access to their medical record.
In Australia?
In the UK. I am working on my GP practice to explain to them that actually they don't have the right to take a decision, that I'll only have my summary care record because they're not sure what I'll do with it if I get the rest. But they're going to be educated on that. South America, they've got some really interesting ideas. In Africa, because of where they're coming from, it all tends to be there. It's starting to. So I don't think there is a one perfect answer. There's no silver bullet. Each country approaches it from the point of view of their particular cultural background, their state of development. I think the developing world potentially could actually leap over the developed world because it has the opportunity to invest in something, whereas we have to change it. Yeah.
Yes, I want to ask a question. How do you see what the IT peer-to-peer system in UK developing, such as the dentists having access to the medications of patients, or the GP having access to a private hospital, and any sort of standards that we may develop? Is that by demand by the patient, by the government, by policy, and so on?
I talked about 12,000 pharmacies, community pharmacies. I could have talked about, I can't remember how many thousand dental surgeries that are there. You've got primary care, you've got secondary care, you've got different types of therapies. And of course, they all have this information in different places, but they are really reluctant to share it. If you are connected to NHS Mail, to the spine, to meeting protocols, you can share that information. We've got, literally, in the last couple of years or so, getting community pharmacists onto the system. So they now have a great deal of information. There are now community pharmacists, as I was seeing this afternoon, who are actually being developed who can prescribe things. There is not, and it was really interesting looking at the 111 system, because the sort of winter pressures, there is 50% of people who go to A&E didn't need to be in A&E. If you've got the 111 system as it used to be, and they go through the protocols and they say you need to go and see your GP, and you can't get through to your GP, you go to hospital. Well, what they're now doing in this particular call centre is they are linking into GP's appointment schedules. So they can say online to the individual, you need to go to your GP, we booked you an appointment for 3 hours' time. So, you know, all of these things, you've got lots and lots of stovepipes, which we have to try and break down. But bear in mind that you've got, you know, the owners of the data, all of us, are very wary about our data being shared with someone. Unless, as I said, I'm ill and I want to know why you haven't done it already. And I mean, I think probably the vast majority of the population really doesn't think about this. You could say that's a good thing or a bad thing. Those who get the voice, who get the ear of the media, so care.data, I mean, for example, 3 years ago, if that had been sold to the media as this is vital to saving lives and treating people, I don't think there would have been a problem. For some reason, the idea got out there that this was selling data to insurance companies. Why? It's illegal. They're not allowed to do it. But that was what everybody believed. And you know, my own personal view on that is that promises were made and people tried to bulldoze this through without understanding the fundamental cultural change of behaviour that was required to make it happen. So, you know, there are lots and lots of people who we will get to the point of sharing data, but we have to have the protocols in place. We have to make sure that they treat that data, they protect it, they look after it, because everyone who doesn't undermines that public trust in the system.
Thank you for a really good answer. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, lady back here.
Just a quick one, you know, I forgive my ignorance on, you know, Nhs Digital and, you know, big things. And learning from your presentation today is a great deal, you know, to understand, you know, the 10 data security standards and how, you know, the government publish report and, you know, timely response to a WannaCry, so on and so forth. From my perspective, you know, because I work in, you know, NHS and, you know, criminal justice and social care, and also now I'm in public sector. So, you know, I'm doing, you know, both information assurance and cybersecurity. And one thing I don't actually catch from your presentation today, I learned it from leadership, senior clinical, you know, practitioner, how important they are. But a lot of, you know, my last 10 years experience in United Kingdom is about the frontline, you know, medical officer. And those is actually day in, day out, talking to the patient, collecting that information, and giving them trust on your balance, very important, trust. So that, you know, when they actually first time they collect the patient data, they actually ask for the consent. They actually, you know, can go doing a lot of, you know, the aftermath sharing of data, or, you know, the ongoing, you know, secondary use of personal data. In, you know, the NHS digital strategy, and as well as, you know, the government published reports that you mentioned, any particular paragraph and statement is regarding how we empower NHS, you know, practitioner, not only the senior clinical, you know, practitioner GP, but actually on the front line and they in touch with the patient day in, day out, every single minute. And how is actually that support the NHS staff and colleagues and empower them, they can actually have more tools and technology to do the job, because from the cybersecurity perspective, we can actually make system perfect. But human, we are far more intelligent than system. We can break it. However, we have, you know, the joiner, mover, and lever policies. We just need one staff not following or not doing the job right, and we break it. And data will be, or excessive access control is still there. So how is actually, you know, from your role and from so far, you know, the NHS you know, digital strategy address this issue?
You're absolutely right. And I talked about information assurance and and security, Dame Fiona's report actually covered a lot more than that. It was about better security, better choice, better care, but it was about consents and opt-outs and actually coming up, and that's what delayed, frankly, the publication of the government's response, was working through all of those issues on consents. And you're absolutely right to talk about the person in the loop. The classic example of that, I guess, was Snowden in the NSA. You know, probably the technically most secure architecture it's possible to design. And my understanding is all the alarms are going off. The management said, you keep setting the alarms off, switch them off, it's irritating. Instead of saying, why are they going off? So, yes, it's about individuals, but it's also about the whole system actually being on guard about inappropriate behaviour and when things go wrong. So, I mean, it's interesting, the airline industry, they cracked this. You know, it is absolutely an issue of learning from mistakes.
That's painful.
Well, it's less painful because, you know, otherwise, if it's repeated again, but they have confidential reporting mechanisms. They, you know, in the airline industry, it is absolutely the case that you report on people who you work with, and they expect that.
Yes. There's no blame.
There's no blame. No blame. We have to try and get health and social care into that space, and that is a huge cultural challenge, and it's a behavioural challenge. But the airline industry did it, and I don't believe that, you know, the health and social care system is any less motivated than the airline industry, because if you make a mistake, someone dies. And, you know, that's something that people do and should care about passionately. And in this space, if something, you know, goes catastrophically wrong, which affects the blood and transplant database or whatever, you know, that could have catastrophic consequences. So, you know, in the same way as for pilots, clinicians, all of us involved, and you involved in health, need to get into that mindset. And, you know, if you find someone who sticks their card on the computer with the PIN number underneath it, call it out. But that requires leadership. It requires boards to say, you know, these are the standards that we want you to achieve. That's what basically those 10 standards are about. But remember, it's technical, it's process, it's people, but it's leadership. And that's why I think that non-executives across the system have a huge role to play in making sure that executives are looking at this as a strategic business risk. Yeah.
Did NHS learn anything from the recent outbreak? Were there any changes recommended as a result of that? The recent WannaCry?
Yeah, there were, and they were in the government response. A requirement was put on healthcare providers within the first 24 hours to report to CareCert that there had been a breach or there was a problem. It was very interesting, the exercise that I was referring to last Friday. They played various scenarios, and one was a disruption in a particular trust, which may or may not have been due to a cyber problem. You know, they have failures all the time. And the trust view was that wasn't necessary to report that. Actually, what had then happened a week later was a deliberate attack, but the media were referring back to what happened in the trust. And of course, actually, no one knew about it. We had a trust about 18 months ago now, which had a ransomware attack. It was on a Sunday. They panicked. They cancelled all their clinical procedures for 3 days. They put a consultant up when the local media came round and said, "What's going on?" Who said, "I don't know, but everybody knows the NHS is riddled with viruses." But I mean, the point there is that why did we need to know about it? A, because it could have been a common problem occurring across the system. It could have been the first stage of a systematic attack. It could have been that there was a vulnerability there that we needed to be sandbagging and protecting against. Because Spine and NHS Mail are monitored 24/7 by a very capable team. They get 99.99% availability on those systems. So there are things that can be done in that sort of space. But it's there's so much more that can be done, and we all have to throw our weight behind it.
Do you think the answer is regulatory and mandatory rules, or is it free education?
Well, GDPR places mandatory reporting requirements on any data controller. And I think that's, on balance, I think that's the right thing to do. But it should be a no-blame culture. You report it, but you bring it back. The reason with the IG toolkit at the moment, there is a requirement for trusts and CCGs to report breaches. But the algorithm says that if you score 2, and basically the fact that there's been a breach and it might come to media attention gets you to a score of 2. If you get a score of 2, it's reported to the department and the Information Commissioner. The reason the Information Commissioner gets over 50% of reports reaching her are about healthcare is because that's what the algorithm generates. And so is that hugely valuable? No, it isn't. One of the other things, you said, what did we put in that document, was a requirement within 48 hours to act on critical alerts that NHS, the CareCert, issues. And there was a critical alert on this vulnerability, and the action was to patch properly. So it's a bit, closing the stable door after the horse is bolted. But for discipline in the future, NHS England, CCGs will be required to respond to confirm they've taken those actions. Will they have done it properly? Well, that's a question. But one of the benefits of this coming out 4 months after WannaCry is those particular improvements were captured and were put into that.
So we have the culture of fire drill well understood, exercised everywhere. Now, as a result of the cyber attack that NHS had recently, do you think it's advisable to introduce a similar culture so that we have a simulation of cyber attack locally in order to minimize vulnerability of the victims?
Yes, bear in mind it was not an attack on the NHS. It was an attack on lots of people, which just had a considerable impact on the NHS. Absolutely. There is every organisation. If you look at the emergency EPRR system that NHS England have, that is rehearsed on a regular basis. Trusts declare major incidents probably every time there's a serious accident or an infection or whatever. And there are set processes for getting people in place. Gold command, silver command, bronze command. One of the problems in WannaCry was that it actually took place during a period of purdah, pre-election purdah. And when it broke out on the Friday, ministers were very nervous about saying anything, because they said, or the department said, rather ministers, you mustn't draw attention to it. Well, social media was brimming over. And we had to say to them, have you been on social media? Because it's out. Within 4 hours, NHS England had declared that major incident and had put those operational arrangements in place. I would absolutely advise anyone who has a major data information assurance target, and not just in health, but to rehearse. You need to have a plan, you need to have a recovery plan, you need to have a resilience plan, and you need to rehearse it. Because, until you rehearse it, you don't know how it's going to work. Now, you will never simulate the precise circumstances that you encounter. But by having a set of procedures that you go through and say, if this happens, these are the things, then that is always a really, really valuable investment. Of course, the problem with exercising is that on the day when it happens for real, you won't have all the members of the management team in the same place to manage the crisis. They will be all over the place. But you have a set of processes, you have a playbook, you have what the military call a doctrine and battle procedure. So that when something happens, everybody knows what their role is in managing the crisis and recovering from it. And when we've done this